Chase, thanks for taking time out of what has to be an extremely complicated moment for you. You're in Florida. You were asked to go there on behalf of NBC News with regard to the approaching storm, Milton. So, first of all, when you're requested to take such a trip, what are the expectations on the other end? What are your duties in the face of a pending hurricane?
The first one is to be prepared before you get that call. I actually have two go bags. Like one of them, I'm based in California, so one of them is for wildfires, and I've also covered, unfortunately, a number of hurricanes. Covered Hurricane Ian a couple of years ago, quite notably. And so I have another bag that is a little bit more wet weather hurricane oriented. So I mean, that's the biggest thing, is being ready to go, because between the time that I got the call, I had 4.5, maybe 5 hours from that call to be on the flight pushing back from the gate. So there's not a lot of wiggle room when these things happen.
And this is not a rhetorical question. It's real, and people see it all the time. Are you expected to be seen in the storm, so to speak? So often we see reporters talking about the news in the storm, being blown around, getting wet. That seems to be a central component of how some of these storms are portrayed in the news. Is that something that you have to do? And what do you think about that?
I will speak for NBC News, and they prioritize safety above all else. They do not want us putting ourselves in risky situations. First of all, for our own well-being, but then also because we're modeling bad behavior on television. So I'm not gonna pick on anyone else, but I mean, I think that we've all seen people on television who are doing things they shouldn't be doing. There are some things that you can do to show the impacts while still keeping yourself safe. One of the things that we've already done is kind of drive around and scout out our location for where we want to be live during the storm, so that we can show what's happening, but also do so safely. It's about like finding a wind shadow of, a sturdy building, maybe a parking
Mm-hmm.
garage. But one of the things that we're never going to do is like, reporters at the coast aren't going to get into storm surge. Like, storm surge and water is by far the most deadly and dangerous part of these storms. So that's just not something we're going to do. So, it's the balance of, people want to see what's going on. They want to see the impacts, but at the same time, like, we need to be smart about it. And so I'm thankful, that my employer and my colleagues all really value safety above all else.
So those were my very simple, on the ground, what are you doing questions. Here's the thing I really want to know. Do you feel like with Milton, on the heels of Helene, that you're reporting not just on storms, but on something much bigger? Are you documenting in real time the impacts of climate change? Is that how you see it? And therefore, what's your obligation to tell your audience?
That's a big part of the reason that I'm here. NBC has, a lot of talented correspondents who cover hurricanes all the time. I have a unique skill set in that I cover climate change. I'm also a meteorologist, so I can talk about those connections in real time. Attribution science, or event attribution, is essentially like the work of studying how weather and climate interact and intersect and influence one another. For people that aren't familiar with that term. And it's come a long way. And it's come so far that we can actually talk about certain things in real time, that we don't have to wait for a new study or a post-mortem on the storm to be able to talk about these things. For instance, I was on television this morning and was asked about the unique track that Milton's taking, coming from the Bay of Campeche right across the Gulf toward possibly Tampa, or sort of the west central coast of Florida. Only two hurricanes have done that. Both of them that we know about anyway were in the 1800s, 150 years ago. So it's not that this is unheard of, but one of the things I can say is that this hasn't happened in roughly 150 years. And in that 150 years, guess what's happened? Because we've been burning fossil fuels, our atmosphere is a lot warmer. Our oceans are a lot warmer. So now you have this storm taking this very rare track, which gives it, by the way, maximum runway across the Gulf, across the very warm Gulf. That's problematic on its own. And now add in the climate factor, which is these really warm waters. So you've given a storm a lot of runway over record warm waters, and that's a really concerning setup.
And your audience is seeing pictures of North Carolina right now, and unbelievable destruction, which is sort of just gradually being revealed to them. I don't think people imagined the storm hitting Florida first and then moving inland would have the kind of impact it had as far north as it has. But with that image in their minds of destruction, do you feel that people are taking this storm even more seriously, and you're feeling that in terms of audience response to what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, it can be a little tough to kind of get a handle on audience response truly because, sometimes the most vocal people on social media are maybe not representative of the broader
Hmm.
population. But
Hmm.
a couple of things I can say, one of the members of our crew here in Florida came here from Asheville.
Wow.
So he went from, one calamity to what certainly has the makings of being another one. And one of our crews that's in St. Petersburg today, what they've been talking about is that they've had a matter of days, not even 2 weeks. Like there are mounds. You can probably see this on any television network. There's mounds of debris stacked up in people's yards alongside the roads. And guess what? You have strong winds come through. Now you have projectiles on top of the
Wow.
storm surge, on top of all the regular threats that you have in a hurricane. Now you have mounds of projectile debris that can go through people's windows that, God forbid, anyone's outside. You shouldn't be. Like, it's really scary to think about what that is. And I guess I just want to come back to this point about climate change. It's not that we haven't had hurricanes, and it's not that we haven't had hurricanes come one after the other. But what we are seeing with climate change is that these storms are able to intensify much more rapidly to greater strengths, to greater magnitudes.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, whereas before maybe you had a couple of hurricanes back to back, now we're not just getting hurricanes back to back, we're getting these really strong, powerful, destructive hurricanes back to back.
It would be hard to overstate the importance of the warmth of the waters with regard to these storms, right? Which is also unprecedented. These temperatures right off the Florida Keys and elsewhere, which is obviously doing damage to the sea life there. But for hurricanes, I mean, that is the fuel, correct?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way to think about it is like this. We've all had a cup of coffee or a hot cup of tea, right? You have that cup in your hand, that mug in your hand, and the water inside the cup is warmer in almost all circumstances than the air outside, right? So what do you see? You see all this steam coming off the
Hmm.
cup.
Hmm.
That exact same phenomenon is what
Hmm.
fuels hurricanes. And it's also important to note that there are a couple of buoys in the Gulf where the water is warmer than the air. And the Gulf is like a warm, tropical, subtropical place. So the air is already warm. So to think about the water being even warmer, you essentially have that same process that's happening when you have a hot cup of coffee or hot cup of tea and all the steam's coming off of it. So think about what that's doing. And actually, you don't have to think about what that's doing. You can see the what is now called extreme rapid intensification. Milton is a Category 5 hurricane at the time we're recording this. And according to the data that I've seen, it is the third fastest intensification that we have ever recorded. The other two were Wilma and Felix, both of which happened in just the last couple decades. So, a very clear sign of what climate change with the warmer atmosphere, warmer water is doing to these storms.
So my experience is New Orleans, Katrina, but many storms before that. I wasn't in New Orleans at the time of Katrina, but I witnessed many other storms coming to the Louisiana coast over the period that I lived in that area. Your expectations for this, and you're right, it was just yesterday we were talking about Category 2 to 3, now to 5. If you will, your expectations of what happens when Milton hits the west coast of Florida.
Um, yeah, I mean, I'm hesitating a bit, Duke, because I don't want to be alarmist and I don't want to be doomist, but this is really concerning. I don't really see many good scenarios. The best case scenario here is
Mm-hmm.
still going to be really awful and really destructive.
Mm.
Two of the worst case scenarios are still very much in play. One of them is that this ends up making landfall very close to where Ian made landfall. Those communities still haven't recovered, and it's been 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really bad outcome. The other one that is potentially even worse is if the storm goes just to the north of the mouth of Tampa Bay, and then you're getting all that water pushed up into Tampa Bay. I mean, the storm surge there, we're thinking 10 to 15 feet right now. A lot of this can change in the next couple of days, depending on when people are watching this. But, if we get that other worst case scenario where now you have a major hurricane pushing water into Tampa Bay, and think of it like a bowl, like all the water is going to
Mm-hmm.
get backed up
Mm-hmm.
in there and then just spill into the streets and cover the cities. It's difficult to imagine what that level of destruction looks like. And I mean, my mind goes to like an Andrew, like a Katrina, not exactly the same as those, but I mean, I
Right.
think we could
Right.
be looking at that level of destruction, dude.
And you mentioned going just north of Tampa Bay, which then puts, if you will, the dirty side of the hurricane, right? Then right where the bay would be, and thus even pushing water in a more aggressive manner.
Yeah, and the potential track, like I'm in Orlando, Florida for a couple reasons. This is a place that's prone to flooding. We saw that happen with Ian, where there were hundreds of people that had to be rescued from their homes. They got 13, 15 inches of rain. Was just talking to a city council member here in Orlando, and they said, our stormwater system can handle 3 or 4 inches of rain an hour, but we get more than that. We get more than 6 to 10 inches of rain. There's just nowhere for the water to go. So there's the very real risk of flooding here. But then on top of that, if Milton is as strong as it could be when it makes landfall, regardless of precisely where it is on the coast, here in Orlando is guaranteed to get rocked. I mean, it could still be, it's not out of question, out of the realm of possibility that it could still be a strong category 2, maybe even a weak category 3 by the time it reaches to Orlando. And, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I would struggle to think of when that has happened before.
And our next summit for Tenacross will be in Jacksonville. You can imagine we're in touch with our colleagues there right now. And so what you're describing for Orlando could also be a circumstance for Jacksonville. So I'll just close this out by saying you're in a state where discussions of climate change have been fraught to some extent. I'm not suggesting we need more storms to resolve that issue or cause people to think differently, but there just doesn't seem to be any doubt that this back-to-back and who knows what else is ahead of us situation is causing many of us to think differently about how we describe these circumstances and wanting to build bridges between others who may have different thoughts about what's causing these storms to happen, and get as serious as we can be about the adaptation we're just simply going to have to make for a different world.
Indeed, Duke. And I don't. It's hard to find silver linings with a storm like this. If there is one, maybe it's that we have a few more people understanding the reality of what's happening to our planet. But even as I was doing a couple of storms about the climate influence on Helene, the amount of feedback that I got on social media, a couple of platforms in particular, but people saying, well, this is just the consequences of Democrats modifying the weather. And it's like, but, no, and I personally don't understand what benefit people get from trying to sow disinformation in the wake of disaster, when people have lost everything, when people have lost loved ones. Like, what? There's never a time for disinformation, but why are you choosing such a difficult time for people to spread misinformation and disinformation? So, I hope if there's a silver lining that more people understand the reality of what we're doing to our planet.
I hope this goes without needing to be said, but neither political party has the capacity to change the weather, nor does the government itself. So I hope that's understood. But Chase, I really thank you. I know you're extremely busy. For you to take time out of your reporting and preparations, we can't thank you enough for this.
Of course. I'm glad it was helpful, and I hope everyone stays as safe as possible during this storm.
All right. Thank you so much, Chase. Be safe.
Thank you.